His expertise lies in identifying SEO solutions at the intersection of strategy and analytics. This is a long intro. This is like... Welcome to Let's Talk Tech with NVTC, a digital series exploring tech's most notable trends, new innovations, digital transformations, lean, agile principles, and mindsets of the future of work and more. We'll introduce next-gen leaders from member companies of the Northern Virginia Technology Council and learn about the great impact that they're making in our region. I'm your host, Philip Nathram. Welcome to Let's Talk Tech with NVTC. Today's episode will feature Ken Merriam, Managing Director, Supply Chain and Operations, Applied Intelligence at Accenture, and David Simchi-Levi, a professor of engineering systems and director of MIT Data Science Lab. Don't forget to listen until the end so you don't miss our Did You Know section. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Accenture, American Systems, MITRE, our media partner, iHeartMedia, and you can find all of these episodes on Wonk FM as well as the DC Local Leaders podcast. Please welcome Ken and David. How you guys doing?
Doing well. Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
Thanks. Thanks for being here, Ken. David, you're coming all the way from Boston, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, we talked about you're with MIT, and Ken, are you here in the DC area? That's correct?
That's right. Part of Accenture's DC Metro office.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. You know, what's funny is this actually isn't the first time you guys are meeting or had anything to do with each other. You actually went to MIT, didn't you, Ken?
That's right. I was a grad student doing a dual degree there, and just had an amazing opportunity to get to work with David at MIT.
Yeah, you paid him for your degree, like in that, how you guys worked that out, where you were like, hey, if I slip you a little something, maybe I can partner you in with Accenture. Is that how that relationship worked?
More or less. But remember, he was also my student. I was advising him on his thesis, and then he come to my office and he says, I decided to go to Accenture. I was responsible for a program, and Ken was a student in the program, focusing on manufacturing. And for us, going to manufacturing companies was the objective. Going to consulting was something we tried to convince our student not to do. And here comes Ken, my top student, and saying, I'm going to Accenture. That was a shock.
Yeah, sounds like it was heartbreaking for you.
I had to, I had to prep myself for that conversation, David, that day.
I know, because we preach every month, every week, students, the focus is on manufacturing. You need to go to real manufacturing companies. And indeed, most of the students went to manufacturing companies with the exception of Ken.
The way I was able to get it through was I explained to David, look, I'm going to be working with a lot of companies, manufacturing companies. So this was going to broaden my horizons, right? Through Accenture. So that lessened the pain there.
Yep.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it worked out pretty well. Now, David, you at MIT, you've been doing supply chain management, analytics, and doing this kind of work for probably, 20 years or something like that, a little bit longer than the actual relationship that's developed, between you and Ken with Accenture in that field. You also created a lab and named it after yourself with your initials. Is that correct? I think that's
not exactly. I
thought it was DSL. Isn't that what that is?
Yeah. For data science lab. But a little bit about my background and experience. I've been an academic for about 30 years and on the faculty at MIT for the last 20 years. But in parallel, I started and sold a few companies. One around supply chain analytics that I sold in 2008, and it became part of IBM supply chain technology. And then in the last couple of years, I sold two companies to Accenture, one around business analytics and one around cloud technology. And as a result, I have been collaborating over multiple years with people at Accenture, like Ken.
Yeah, so it wasn't all that bad that he went to Accenture.
Exactly.
So Ken, why don't you give us a little bit about you and Accenture, and I guess within Accenture, what you kind of specialize in, and just a quick background on that.
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. So as you know, Accenture is a very large global professional service company. We have a lot of leading capabilities in the space of digital, cloud, security, and we've got over 500,000 people, right? And we bring our experiences and specialized skills to our clients across 40 industries and over 120 countries. And where I belong in Accenture is in one of the 4 service areas. Specifically, it's the service area called strategy and consulting. And within that, I belong to the supply chain applied intelligence practice. And what we do there is we apply data science capabilities that range from applied intelligence, optimization, blockchain, and automation to solving our clients' toughest supply chain problems. And one of these challenges actually is helping our clients building resilience into their supply chains, which is what we'd love to talk to you about today, actually with David as well.
Philip, if I can just tell you a little bit about the data science lab, what you call DSL. So what is the data science lab at MIT? The data science lab is a partnership between MIT and a variety of companies focusing on the most important challenges, business challenges that these companies have, by bringing together data, models, and analytics. The partnership is cross-industry. We have companies in oil and gas, retail, consulting, like Accenture, government, insurance, airline. And what we do are one of a kind. We were the first to develop supply chain segmentation and implemented it at a large high-tech company. And in the last couple of years, Accenture followed up and implemented basically our framework at multiple companies. Supply chain resiliency, that is the focus of this discussion. We have developed a new way of thinking and measuring resiliency in the supply chain. We have developed new algorithms and analytics for inventory and transportation optimization. And very large software companies have implemented our technology. We have a partnership with IBM. We have a partnership with ABI InBev. And so it's cross-disciplinary and it's cross-industry. And that's what brought Accenture and MIT to collaborate on the general area of business analytics, and in particular on resiliency.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. And it sounds like Accenture and MIT have had this longstanding relationship to support each other. And then it's even better that you and Ken individually had a longstanding relationship to support each other through this effort. And I think you mentioned one of the buzzwords we want to get into today, which is supply chain resiliency and stress testing. And I think so the work that you guys have been doing, for anyone, who's listening and may not really understand, I mean, it's been critical, especially over the last year, like with, for example, COVID and getting things from one place to the next, but it spans pretty much every industry you can think of, right? Manufacturing and electronics. Why don't you, Ken, why don't you tell us a little bit about, from the commercial end, some of your analytics, who is it helping? What industries are you working with, and what is it doing? And then maybe we can just get into kind of helping us understand, what is this stress test? What does it mean to be resilient with your supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the pandemic has brought about a lot of change, right? It's brought a lot of attention, of course, to supply chains, right? And specifically, it's really changed the way that the C-suite, the executives leading a lot of the companies that we work with, look at resilience, right? Resilience went from being an afterthought on the C-suite agenda to being a top priority, right? Resilience also became broader than just protecting the bottom line. It's now also about protecting the social well-being of its employees and customers. And so through the pandemic, we've all personally experienced, right, how access to food, to dry goods, to services, to pharma, all the industries that, you hear about, we've all experienced how quickly access to those products and services can be affected by a disastrous event. And since supply chains are all about moving goods from sourcing the raw materials themselves to delivering the finished goods to customers, you can see how supply chain resiliency became a hot topic in news. In fact, the topic of supply chain resilience literally has been written about daily in 2020, right? And through 2021. And one of our studies found that 94% of Fortune 1000 companies were affected by COVID-related material disruptions. And so it's really no surprise that Accenture found that many of our clients are looking for a standard, consistent, and structured approach to managing the risk of disastrous events and quantifying resilience. And this is where Accenture leadership was very excited to see the work that David was publishing in places like Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan on this space. And so partnering with MIT was an opportunity to bring to our clients the most innovative thinking and advanced analytics to addressing this need on resilience.
I think it will be important, Philip, to understand that resiliency is not a new concept. It's not a new challenge. In fact, we at MIT have been working on resiliency since 2012, 2011, after events like the tsunami in Japan and the flood in Thailand in 2011, and after events like the volcano eruption in 2010 and Iceland affecting companies in a variety of industries. And so the data science lab that I described earlier developed a new way to measure the level of resiliency in the supply chain. We'll talk about that later on. And as a result, to design mitigation strategies that company can use to increase the level of resiliency. But between 2012 and the beginning of the pandemic, there was little interest, we can talk about why later on, by companies to implement such strategies. A few companies did. Ken mentions the Harvard Business Review article that I wrote where I described the implementation of our concept at Ford. We implemented at telecommunication companies, at high-tech companies, but not many companies and executives were interested. Everything changed at the beginning of the pandemic. And let me illustrate this with just two observations. In February of 2020, so before the pandemic was hitting North America, when it was already hitting China, I submitted a short paper to Harvard Business Review, a paper that I wrote with a high-tech executive, Pierre Harren. This is a paper submitted in mid-February. It appeared online on February 28th, and it received about 200,000 clicks in the first 3 days. What did we say in the paper that we wrote in mid-February about supply chain? Here is what we said. We said that the peak of the impact of COVID-19 on global supply chain will happen in mid-March, forcing thousands of companies to shut down manufacturing activities in both the US and Europe. And this is exactly what happened. On March 17, newspapers around the world, in North America and in Europe, reported that the automotive industry is completely shutting down, reported that consumer goods manufacturing companies are shutting down. So here was a proof that what we at MIT have developed is working. Not only it's a framework and analytic, but it's predicting correctly what happened in your supply chain. That's where the flood of interest in what we developed started. And then the following incident was even more important. In April of that year, in April last year, I published a short paper in Harvard Business Review where I said we need supply chain stress tests. We need stress tests for supply chain, and we have that available. If you follow what the current administration is doing, the Biden administration is doing, this is exactly what they are doing. They are taking critical industries from cheap semiconductor manufacturing to food to healthcare, all the industries that I mentioned in the paper, through important stress tests to identify the level of resiliency and what needs to be done to increase that level.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great recap of what brought about the need for the development of a supply chain resiliency stress test so that you can actually measure something. It's, it wasn't enough to talk about it or predict it, but how do you know how much it's going to be affected? Can you tell us a little bit more about what the resiliency stress test is in concept? Like, what is it measuring? Is it 1 to 10? Is it 1 to 100? Is it between 1 and 0, and you get percentages, like, some sort of probability?
So stress test is none of the above. It's not an index. It's not a number between 1 and 10. I borrowed the idea for stress tests from the financial industry. If you remember, after the financial crisis of 2008, the federal government in the US, government in Europe established stress tests that banks need to take their business through to make sure they are ready for the next financial crisis. And this is exactly what we need in supply chain. And so we have identified in the work that I mentioned earlier between 2012 and the beginning of the pandemic, a number of ways to measure the level of resiliency in the supply chain and therefore identify hidden risks. One is what I call time to recover. You build a supply chain mapping. You build a digital twin of your supply chain. And then you ask, if there is a disruption in a specific facility, be it a manufacturing facility, an assembly facility, a distribution center, a hub, how long it will take to recover after a disruption. And given that I know time to recover, I can estimate financial and operational impact. During the time this facility is down, let's say time to recover is 6 weeks, what is the impact on Ford? The first time we implemented the concept was at Ford. What is the impact on Ford revenue? What is the impact on Ford market share? What is the impact on Ford profit? And what are the operational impact? What is the impact on lost production? That's one measure, and it's clearly scenario dependent. The second measure that we develop is completely scenario independent. That measure is time to survive. That is, again, you have your supply chain mapping, and you ask the following question. If this specific facility is down, how long can I match supply with demand without that facility? It's not zero, because the supply chain is full with inventory, but I can estimate it. I can determine how long I can survive. And if time to survive is very long, that's great. It means that when there is a disruption, it will not create a problem. But what we are interested in are those facilities in the supply chain where time to survive is very short. We'll talk later on about what we found in implementation across multiple companies, but these were the key ideas, the key innovations that we came up with that allow companies to start measuring the level of resiliency in their business.
Yeah, well, so Ken, I'd be interested to hear, what are some of the outcomes that some of your clients or Accenture's clients have been experiencing with the implementation and enabling this capability that they may feel is different from their traditional disruption planning capabilities that they were already, I would hope that they're already doing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Phil. So, this approach is truly different from the traditional approach of supply chain risk management in that, you know, many of the clients that we've worked with in the past, they have some form of business continuity planning, right? That, okay, if a disaster happens, these are the effects, these are the potential effects, these are the implications, etc. But what we found in many of our clients is that those business continuity plans were only scratching at the surface of really quantifying the implications of a disruption event. Secondly, they were specific many times just to their own operations, right? Where the supply chain stress test approach is unique is that it uses advanced analytics to address the first point, which is quantifying resilience. And then two, it extends the analysis beyond the boundaries of a company's supply chain to incorporate its upstream suppliers. So this is where it's very powerful now in identifying weak points in the supply chain. Now, what we've done here, for example, among the companies that we're working with MIT on in implementing stress tests on their supply chain is, for example, Sigma, right? Sigma is a global food company. And right now we're currently working with Sigma's European subsidiary, and then that's Campo Frio, which manages thousands of products and works in with hundreds of suppliers in Europe alone, right? And so here is a fantastic opportunity to, you know, apply the concept of the supply chain stress test approach. And we're working very closely with one of our clients, Fernando Ibarra, who's the supply chain director of Sigma in Europe. And when we started working with him, he said, look, Ken, as a company with a wide international footprint, we need to ensure an uninterrupted supply of products to our customers, no matter what disruption occurs. And this need is not specific, right, to Sigma. We see it in all our clients. And so he also noted, you know, once we started working and starting to develop and implement this approach in Sigma, that the work done so far had really highlighted critical attention points and discovered hidden risks in the network, which, David, why don't you go ahead and share some of those points as we work collaboratively on that?
So we worked collaboratively on Sigma, but as I mentioned, we have had about 8-10 years experience implementing this approach. And what you find are 3 important lessons from the focus on supply chain resiliency and the type of analytics that I described earlier. The first is that risk is hidden in unexpected places. If you think about Ford, in the initial discussion with Ford executive about supply chain risk mitigation strategies, their executive focus on strategic suppliers. The intuition and the experience that they had was that strategic suppliers are the risky suppliers. The analytics came up with a different conclusion. Strategic suppliers are risky, but not very high risk, because these tend to be large companies. They have multiple facilities in different regions. The risky suppliers are tiny suppliers that provide Ford with components that cost less than 15 cents. These are the riskiest suppliers. When we implemented this at other companies, we found exactly the same insight. And when this was implemented at Sigma, consistent insight as well. That's the first lesson. The second lesson is so important for what we hear today about what companies need to do. In multiple implementation, we found that risk is not associated with certain geography. For Ford, risky suppliers were in Europe, in North America, and in Asia. So this idea that you just need to move manufacturing facilities from one region to another, or from Asia to North America, and this guarantee resiliency, this is not supported by supply chain experience. This is not necessarily what will bring resiliency to the supply chain. And the third thing that we learn, and we learn this together with Ken as well, together with Accenture, is that when you do this type of work, when you focus on resiliency, you find challenges and opportunities. The challenges is identifying the hidden risk in the supply chain. The opportunities, a lot of time companies build a lot of inventory just in case. If you cut inventory even by 30, 40%, you still have a lot of resiliency. And so this is about identifying hidden risk, but also cutting cost and removing redundancy when you don't need it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like and even for companies that survived the pandemic and had slowdowns, but something that maybe they wouldn't have considered a reason to alter the way that they do things, they still have a tendency to potentially focus on reducing cost and enhancing speed and fall back into old habits. What advice can you give to them for any of those companies listening today about what the need for qualifying their resiliency could be, and what they can be looking at as a strategy to work with you or to be thinking about?
Yeah. I can take that question here, Phil, and I'll pass it on to David for additional comments. But, yes, maybe as a company or as an organization, you've been able to weather the impacts of the pandemic, and it's easy to fall back, as you said, on those habits. But truly, now is the time for companies to prioritize quantifying their supply chain's resilience and designing their supply chain to better adapt and absorb disruptive events in the future. In 2020, Gartner made this study, and they reported that 87% of companies are investing to make their supply chains more resilient over the next 2 years, right? So this is happening, right? And we really believe that this is also a great time to do it, because in addition to reprioritizing resilience, the pandemic also sped up digital transformation. For example, we're seeing a really high number of firms taking their supply chains to the cloud to reduce costs, to speed up operations and recoveries, to manage mission critical tasks. And here again, Gartner found that 2 out of every 3 companies are investing in enhancing digital supply chain visibility. Now, the reason I mention this digital transformation is because digitizing the business and the supply chain, right, is something that will help accelerate the ability for companies to enable supply chain stress testing. A core part of stress testing the supply chain is building a digital twin of the supply chain, as David mentioned. And this requires cross-enterprise data, right? And the necessary data for stress testing will now be more easily available via these recent digital transformation efforts. And so while the pandemic has been highly disruptive, there's still going to always be disruptions in all types or forms that range from factory fires, labor disruptions, port congestion, just to name a few, right? And stress testing your supply chain right now makes sense.
I think your question brings, in addition to what Ken highlighted, 2 important topics. The reason we were not surprised by what happened in 2020 is because before, companies focus on, Philip, as you said, on efficiency, cut costs in any possible way. What this highlighted is the importance of finding the right balance between efficiency and resiliency. And finding the right balance between efficiency and resiliency is all possible by using technology. The second point that the pandemic brought and that we learned over the last 12 or so months is the amazing impact of technology. In fact, we learned that the future of supply chain is right here. We learned that digitization, data, analytics, automation, combined with the experience and insight that supply chain professionals have, can make an enormous impact on the ability to recover from a disruption. And we have seen this across multiple industries, multiple companies in a variety of industries, from high tech to automotive to the food industry, all the way to CPG.
Yeah, I mean, and it sounds like, you guys have got a great thing going with each other here where it's, it's not like you can just stock up. To your point earlier, for bringing up that, stocking up on inventory is very expensive. And, that is not the solution that you want to take to weathering a storm should it happen. And you don't have to, especially if you're already going through a digital transformation. Why not incorporate this as a part of it so that you have something to measure and actually predict when you'll have some disruptions and put together a plan in advance to be able to weather that storm, aside from let's buy more. For example, I think one of the examples, and you mentioned multiple times, David, is that the automotive industry. And I think right now we're seeing, they experienced a shortage of semiconductors, for example. How would having a stress test available to them have prevented or allowed them to be better? It wouldn't have prevented it, but it may have allowed them to be better prepared if they didn't have the inventory to weather that storm.
Yeah, this is such a great question. And to answer your question, it's appropriate to try and understand what happened in the automotive industry. At the beginning of the pandemic, last year, April, May, June, automotive manufacturers saw dramatic reduction in demand. And so they reduced their orders from suppliers, right? These tier one suppliers then reduce orders to their own supplier, tier two supplier, all the way to the chip manufacturers, the wafer manufacturers. The wafer manufacturer saw this reduction in order from the automotive industry, but at the same time, they saw dramatic increase in demand for consumer electronic product, for smartphone, especially because of 5G, for game, and for Bitcoin technologies. Mm-hmm. And so what did the wafer manufacturers do? They started reallocating capacity from the automotive industry to other industries. The other industries are more lucrative because they provide the wafer manufacturer higher margins. And as a result, when the demand in the automotive industry starting catching up, all of the automotive manufacturers order at the same time. But lead time of wafer technology is very, very long, 6, 7, 8 months. If you need to build another manufacturing facility, it's 2 years. And so this long lead time implies that we see the shortages that we have seen here, because all the automotive manufacturers are ordering at the same time. Everybody is trying to stock as well because they are thinking, oh, maybe tomorrow I will not have. This is what we call in supply chain a classical bullwhip effect, a hit of huge orders coming to the wafer manufacturers, and the wafer manufacturers do not have capacity, and they report that delays are going to be here to stay. Some of the wafer manufacturers are talking about 2 years until this challenge is addressed. The stress test would have allowed companies to identify, oh, you will have a shortage of supply, and therefore you need to make decision what to do. And in fact, if you look at what Toyota has done, Toyota stocked up enough inventory, and they are the company least affected in the automotive industry by this disruption.
Yeah, and to your point, if they had this stress test capability, or if they were, if they hired Ken, and he was able to work with you to do it, they wouldn't have had to have that expense to stock up on that, because they would have been a little bit better prepared and been able to navigate it differently. Well, yeah, I mean, look, I've learned a lot, and I know that pretty much everyone listening in has learned a lot too. But I do want to ask just really quickly, we talked a lot about logistics and manufacturing. Are there other industries that do you see this, the Accenture trying to apply this in other industries that also deliver a product, but maybe don't ship them from one country to the next or one part of the country to the next? I guess my real question is, how transferable is this test for all of our listeners and all the tech community here? What can they take away from that if, like, maybe this is something we want to talk to them about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've talked about several industries already, but to be honest, this concept of mapping out how you get the goods that you offer your customers, right? Whether it's products or services, from start to finish, which is the delivery of those goods. Whenever you have that, right? Whenever you have a form of supply chain or operation to be able to deliver those goods, that's where you can really find ways of applying supply chain stress testing. So you can find those weak links, you can prioritize them, and then you can figure out what actions, what remediation actions you should take so that when there is a disruption, you will be prepared, right? And it will be prepared in a way that is, from a margin standpoint, makes sense, right? So that's something that I feel is not specific to the foods industry or the high tech or the, auto industry like we've spoken. This goes so much broader. And I believe it's something that also relates to services as well. I'll let David offer any other insight into that.
Let me just illustrate what Ken is talking about with an example that shows that this has nothing to do with supply chain where you move goods from country to country. And my best example is what happened in April of last year in the food industry in the US. Think about product like beef and pork. All the supply chain in this for this product is localized. It's all in the US. But because of consolidation, because companies in this industry focus on cutting costs, when the pandemic hit, a disruption of one manufacturing facilities created a huge shortage of meat product in this country. And this is why I'm emphasizing just moving activities from one country to another does not guarantee resiliency. Just look at what happened in the last 12 months in the food industry in the US. That is also why I believe, and I think Ken will agree, that what the Biden administration is doing in terms of stress testing, critical supply chain, is very important.
Yeah. Well, guys, so anyone listening and they want to get more information from either one of you, why don't you guys individually just tell us the best way to reach out to get some more info, get to know you, understand how they can maybe hopefully partner with you and hire you to help their business?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you go online and you look up Accenture supply chain stress test, you'll find a ton of materials that, again, we've co-developed with MIT to bring to light a little bit more around what this capability entails. How does it come to life? And so you'll see a lot of materials online. We're also putting together a video that will help further explain it so that folks can go ahead and look through that and get a better understanding of this capability. So again, I recommend going to that source for more information. David, if you have any other sources.
Yep, go to the website of the MIT Data Science Lab. This is dsl.mit.edu, and you will see all the implementation of a variety of technologies in different industries. And in particular, you will see the partnership between Accenture and MIT and its impact on business in general, but in particular on supply chain.
Yeah, and I guess it sounds like they can get in touch with you without having to go through the graduate program of MIT just to get FaceTime with you.
Exactly.
Are you at least a little bit more proud of Ken now, since we kind of talked it through? I know he's going to Accenture, he's going to the dark side.
I've been proud of him since he joined the program.
Yeah, I can tell you guys vibe well together, and it's no surprise that this program between MIT and Accenture is doing well. And it sounds like you guys are helping a lot of companies do a lot, keep people employed, keep goods going different places, keep industry going. So thank you guys so much for chatting with us today. Really appreciate you spending some time. And everyone listening, don't forget to listen in to our Did You Know section coming up next. Did you know over 5 million are employed in transportation and warehousing? According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. alone is home to over 5 million transportation and warehousing employees, showing the sheer size of this industry. Supply chain management software is huge and still growing. A recent report showed that supply chain management software grew 9% year over year, a huge annual change for an already massive business. Did you know the US is projected to be the top market for supply chain management in 2021 at $8.6 billion, followed by Germany at $885 million, the UK with $847 million, Japan with $824 million, and China with $737 million. Thanks for listening in. We hope you enjoyed today's program. We look forward to seeing you next month. And until then, check out nvtc.org for more information. Or you can follow us on Twitter at Nova Tech Council and on LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up at nvtc.org for our mailing list so you don't miss any of the invites.
We look forward to seeing you at next month's Let's Talk Tech with NVTC. In the meantime, follow us at Nova Tech Council on Twitter and LinkedIn, and remember to sign up for the latest tech news at nvtc.org.